and I've just connected to Emily Wood, really a very, very experienced person who is going to be our next speaker. And I think we are very, very lucky to have her with us today to continue the conversation. But before I yield the floor to Emily and check if she hears me well and sees me well, I really owe someone an apology. And I think you guys have already discussed that in the chat. Mistakes happen, and I do really, really feel very sorry to John, who is in Sydney. Amazing city. Also traveled there when my husband worked in Australia. Loved this place, and I'm really, really very sorry. I think I must have missed this out. Chomped by Johannesburg. So, John, I do ensure you that if there are any questions from you to Emily, you'll be the priority person and we'll entertain your question first. Right, at this point of time, I would like to just once again mention that Emily is with us for to my personal opinion, really very interesting topic about learning paths and all we need to know. And I'd like to check if Emily hears us well and sees us well. Emily, how are you?
I'm fantastic. How are you doing?
Very excited. I've had already so many different interesting questions, fantastic presentations. It's been a very, very engaging session. So I'm sure you're going to enjoy it as well. Do you think we're ready to start?
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm ready to
Great
go in
flag.
here. And John, I'm excited to answer all of your questions about learning paths. So I caught the end of Kevin's presentation there, and it sounds like you all have a really good handle now on how you're going to come in and create this content that you want to have to give out to your learners. And we're going to talk a little bit about creating content and what that needs to look like for us to do learning paths. But really, my focus here is on what are learning paths, why are we using them, and kind of what value are they going to have to us as an organization. So I'm Emily Wood. You got a little bit of my bio. I have a company called Serenity Learning LLC. If you want to play the opposite game from Kevin, we could do who's the closest to Tacoma, Washington in the United States. And if you've never heard of Tacoma, it's closer to Seattle kind of area. And John, I'm a little bit closer to you since, I'm that far west of Ohio. All right, so let's go ahead and talk about learning paths. So the first thing I want to do, I like to start off all of my conversations when I'm working with a new client on making sure that the words that I'm saying are the words that you're understanding. So what is a learning path? So the first thing that we have here is a learning path is going to be a set of lessons or content items, which can be courses, quizzes, or other materials that are combined to make a compound course. And it can consist of chapters, which in turn can include courses. And I actually got that from iSpring because, what better place to get information about learning paths than from the iSpring news company. So what does that really mean for us? Basically, it's consolidating all of these different learning materials that we want to bring together. And in this case, you can see it's both that content that we have and our way of assessing it. It's also important to note that the modality is not limited in learning paths. So a lot of times I will do a variety of different pieces of material that are going to come together to create these learning paths. And that might be a flipped classroom where I have people read information before they show up and come and join me for whatever it is that I'm going to teach. And then the in-person session, which could be like this, where it's a virtual instructor led, or it could be a literal classroom training now that we're moving back into our offices and we have the ability to interact in person. Or it could be what we were just doing here with Kevin and that full asynchronous training that we have. And then how are we going to support that person going forward? So I'm sure you guys are going to agree with me that when you're teaching somebody, you can't just say, okay, here's the content, one and done, and then they're going to just have this magical behavior change, right? What we need is this sort of way of reinforcing all of that information around to make sure not only are you getting all of these steps of change management, the awareness of what it is that I'm teaching, the ability to understand it, the skill to do it, and then the affective nature of the agreement that we're actually going to do what it is that I'm being asked to do, but I need to reinforce that with you over time. And that's the beauty of a learning path, because it gives us that opportunity to grow and build on a particular piece of information. So tell me in chat here, what is the biggest challenge that you have right now when you're building your learning paths? I want to make sure that I address the issues that you came to this talk for, to see what it is that will be most helpful for you as I go through, so I can sort of ensure I spend the most time on the things that'll have the most value for you.
Right. Maybe we need just a couple of seconds for the colleagues to type in the chat what they feel to be the biggest challenge with learning paths. And I'm sure just in a matter of seconds, we'll start receiving the answers. So the first one's from David: how to make it flow and remain interesting for the learner at the same time. Juventus says it's about right engagement for the right content. Then we have Brenda, who says just getting started. So that seems to be the challenge. Eddie adds that it's executive buy-in. And I can feel that pain. Andrea says about learners' engagement. Brenda says about, Tara speaks about creating content for positions that don't have a lot of turnover. And I'll probably wrap it up now because we've got so many other opinions coming. And I'm very, very happy that we've got really a variety of very different opinions in the chat.
Oh, and I like this one that just came in. Too many things for one topic and trying to prioritize how to present it and for how long. So this is really fantastic because that means that we have this content and we know that we want to offer it and we know that it needs to be over this longer period of time. Maybe our learners don't agree. Maybe our executives are a little bit questioning that. We can get into that more. But we're really trying to like parse out what it is that's going to make this effective. And I am right there with you. Engagement is going to be our problem, right? So a learner is only going to be limitedly excited about doing EHS courses. I don't care how many, environmental health and safety. There aren't enough times that it's like, hey, make sure that you wear the proper mask or climb the ladder the right way before they're kind of glassed out, because it's the stuff that you feel like and it seems really obvious, and why do I have to keep taking this every couple of years just because it's compulsory from the government? So I'm going to talk to you about how we can manage trainees from different departments, sort of the diversity of audience that we have and how that's going to affect our learning paths. How are we literally going to develop the learning paths? And then the big thing that's important to me is the personalization of this content. So beyond having this learning path itself, how do I make it feel unique to you and unique to me when I come in as a learner to really have all of that information in a way that is going to build my engagement and really speak to the gaps that I have that I need to have addressed? Now, there are a couple of different things that we have when we're talking about how we might group our content. And so I did this Venn diagram here for us to think about what these different terms are and what they might mean. Now, for the most part, when we're going to talk learning paths, we're probably going to be using some sort of learning management system or LMS. Do you have to do that? Absolutely not. The benefit of using an LMS is we have that individual tracking for who's doing which parts. We get some of that SCORM data, what are they completing? How long is it taking them to do different parts? How are they doing on the tests? There are ways around that if you don't have that, but honestly, having an LMS for any of these three categories is going to make your life a little bit easier. Now, the three things that I have here, the first one is a catalog. And for me, when I'm talking about the catalog, I mean like literally every piece of material that the organization has, the books, the training, the schedule of courses that are coming up. It's just like the any and everything. This is the bucket where I put it. Then I have these categories. So I might have a category that's, EHS, it's like safety classes. I might have a category that's sales, building sales enablement. I might have a category that's transportation, talking about the different driving things that I need my learners to do. Now, that can be useful for somebody that's coming in that says, oh, I want to find a course on driving that's going to help me understand defensive driving techniques. Great. They can come in, they can search the catalog, they could go into the catalog and choose this category, which is kind of like a chapter maybe that's, all the things that we have about driving, and find the one that they want. But we have this other kind of learner, and they're the kind that says, I have this goal. I want to go and I want to achieve something. There's a body of knowledge that I want to acquire that's where a learning path can really be leveraged well. Because for us, as the people who are developing the learning paths for people, we can come in and stratify that content in a way that'll help the learner where they're at right now. So, for example, if I wanted to take a course on advanced defensive driving, I personally have like 6 different kinds of car licenses. I can probably just jump into an advanced defensive driving class and be totally fine. But somebody who's, 15, 16, they're driving their first car, they're getting that first basic level license, they probably need a little bit more foundational knowledge for that person to be successful. So a learning path could be something like learn to drive safely, where they're going to have all of these different courses that come together. And at the end, I have this huge terminal objective that's now I am going to be a safe driver. So one of the questions that I get asked a lot is, who is it that's developing learning paths? Like, how do we decide who gets to come in and make these decisions and what we're going to do? And this is where we're going to have that combination of instructional designers and learning managers, if your company has somebody in that kind of role. And then really, you need that executive buy-in. So the organizations where I typically work, I'm working for somebody who's like the head of HR or the head of product operations kind of person. So that person, the sponsor of whatever you're doing for the organization, is going to be one of the people. But then the other person that's really going to be involved is that subject matter expert who's helping you define that content that you're working with. So I would work with that person and say, okay, let's look at what content we have and then figure out how this is going to make the most sense. Now, to that end, before I go into that, the other things that I wanted to talk about, the benefit here of doing a learning path versus a catalog or a category is we have the ability to assign dates. And I don't know about you, but I can tell you when I'm doing something that's got like a subscription onto it, the first few days, I'm pretty good about doing it. I'll go in and I'll do whatever it is that I plan to do. And then I might not look at it for like 8 months. Think about like your gym membership, right? Are you going every month? No, but when that bill hits your credit card, it's like, ooh, I should probably go back and do that again. The learning path having these deadlines and dates with that countdown clock will dramatically, like double-digit increase percentage, increase the number of people that actually finish the courses that you have in a learning path. We also have the ability to do gating of content. So how I talked about, I might jump into a higher defensive driving course, whereas somebody who has less experience would take a lower level one. We, as the people making these decisions about what goes into the learning path, can help put that information into those categories to help the learner better understand. Now, we can also make the decision about what they can skip and what they can't skip. So think about like a graduate or higher education. In higher education, you have the opportunity to take a number of core classes that everybody takes, so we all get the same foundation of knowledge that we're going to have within the organization. But then we also have the ability to specialize. So I got a specialized degree in marketing, specifically in market research. And so I took lots of courses on like R and statistical analysis and how to run qualitative versus quantitative data kinds of things. Whereas somebody else that I went to college with got her degree in sports marketing. So she took lots of courses about like affinity programs and how to build brand loyalty. And so while we both have marketing degrees, they have very different sort of ways that we specialized within marketing to best suit the needs of what we wanted to do with our lives. And then beyond that, we have electives, and they can be kind of just the fun things that we add in. So like I ended up taking Asian literature from the 1500s because I thought that would be fun to learn. They're like the categories of things that we need you to know something about it, but it doesn't necessarily matter so much which one it is. Or that's where we could have something where it's got multiple levels in it. So the learning path is going to give us the ability to help our learners facilitate this and move toward that goal that we're setting with the path. Now, I've been talking a lot about our learners, so let's talk about who these people are that are actually going to come in and work on these learning paths or take the learning paths that we're creating. Now, this is just a sort of generic organizational chart. You want to think about who's at your organization, what do they bring to the organization, and then in the context of the content that we're talking about, what is it that they're trying to get out of it? So, for example, my network administrator, who's a manager of people, who's doing different things related to the technology within the organization, might have similar needs to my sales manager in terms of what is it that I need to manage a team successfully, and how do I handle conflict within a team, and how do I do performance reviews. But I'm going to have really different information in terms of staying up to date on the latest technology trends than knowing about how to do sales enablement. And so that's where we can have learning paths that'll overlap, that'll help all the people at one level, and then have those differentiated ones where the network administrator might take that same IT training that we would then be offering to the technology technicians, for example. So experience level within the organization. What's one of the main courses everybody takes and builds when they start at a new company or a company that's doing their update? Inevitably, you go to a conference and there's going to be at least 10 different courses that you can take with somebody about new employee orientation. How do we do pre-boarding? What does onboarding look like? How do we indoctrinate them into our culture? How do we help them understand how to be successful first 90 days, first 6 months, first year, all of these different things. So if you're brand new within an organization, there's like this body of knowledge about our organization and how to interact with it that we want to build. Then we have the experience level within the role. So I could be brand new to the organization, but come in with 15 years as a car salesperson. And I could be a phenomenal salesperson who makes all the goals, and you've brought me in because you want me to just hit the ground and go out and sell and maybe mentor some of the other people on the team. Or I could be somebody that has a whole lot of experience, running laundromats, and now I've decided to come and work in the car industry. So what is it that you need to help me take that skill base that I have, because I have years of fundamental skills and customer service and like running bookkeeping and all the different skills that I've brought that I'm now going to leverage into this new role? And how am I going to create those deep connections in that content that I have to make me successful as I'm transitioning to this new part of my life? Then we have the literal experience with the content itself. So what do I know about cars? What do I know about sales? How do these things come together? What is it that I need to have? So you can do a lot of adaptive types of learning, both pre-testing people before they go into different parts of the content, or gating it, where I could, test out of whole sections of the content if it's something that I'm already really successful at. And then lastly, I want to talk a little bit about the competencies of the audience. Now, if you haven't heard about it before, something that you might want to consider looking into is called XAPI. It's a language that's been around for about 10 years now, where you can add additional information about somebody's knowledge acquisition and learning acquisition that can apply to things outside of your learning ecosystem. So maybe one of the skills that I want to build with somebody is how to become a new manager. So I'm going to make a learning path about that. With XAPI, I could have something like, one of my goals is to lead a meeting where I have to write an agenda and then be the timekeeper and then keep the meeting on track, and then how effectively that I do that. And then the people who attend this meeting that I'm doing could score me. And then that's tracked in XAPI and goes back toward the LMS. And once I reach a certain score of things that I've done in real life and showing this proficiency, moves me to that next level. There's some really interesting implications of how that's been used both in museums, and I've seen it used really well in the construction industry. So taking my ability to actually demonstrate what it is that I'm doing and how that's applying in the real world, and then connecting that to the knowledge. Because hopefully you've heard of the 80-20-10 rule. So 10% of what we're learning is in these really formal types of trainings, like what we're doing here in our LMS with our learning path. And then 20% is going to be that guided, mentored, specific teaching kind of thing. And we can use XAPI for a lot of that, where it's, here are the things that I'm going to go out and do that are going to support that learning that I have, that can build me in that proficiency. And then the 80%, the 70% that's left is going to be the what I'm doing, just sort of going through my life and experiences that I can draw in that are also going to add to my skill in that area. So I've used XAPI in the past to build into content trainings where I've been testing somebody's problem solving ability or critical thinking skill or interpersonal skills in the guise of a content training. So then I can use that. Yeah, thank you. You caught it too. 70, 20, 10. So I've been using that to help me ensure that I can see where people have these competencies and then help them as they look to move within the organization to move to these other roles. Because for me, the thing that I like about learning paths and why I focus on building them as part of my career is to allow people that opportunity to upskill themselves, to be self-directed, to move where they want to go with the career that they have. Now, we have content, right? There are things that the organization wants. There are all of these different goals that we have, and we want to take and offer that in some sort of logical framework to our learners. So right now, where you are today at your organization, tell me, are you starting from scratch? Like, are you blank slate, startup, organization has no content? Or do you have a big body of content where you're trying to now take that content and then fit it into learning paths that you want to build?
While we're waiting for the responses in the chat, and I assume you see the answers, may I ask you, what kind of clients do you usually have? Do they start from scratch or?
So right now I'm working with an organization that has a body of knowledge that we have been taking, and as we build the learning paths, we've been rewriting the content to meet the goal of the learning path. So there is like a base level of content, but we're altering it as part of our needs assessment as we build the learning path concurrently. Mm-hmm. And we're doing it as a gated program where you go through different phases over a series of time, where you have to do a certain number of e-learning modules, a certain number of hands-on tasks, and a certain number of, like, in real life doing your job your supervisor has to check off before you can pass the next gate.
I see. All right, then let's compare this with what we have in the chat. I believe you are reading the comments, right? And you don't need me to read them out loud. Right.
So we have a bunch of people from scratch, a little bit of both, body of knowledge, but no online. Okay. And again, Nadine, I want to emphasize the fact that learning paths do not have to mean online learning. Now, because we're talking about it in the context of tracking it within a learning management system, you would have at least like the title of the course and what it's going to cover. But a learning path can absolutely 100% cover any of your instructor-led training as well. Now, that said, I love doing everything online. Online is my bread and butter, so don't let me deter you from making asynchronous online training. All right, so I'm going to start off assuming we have a little bit of content, but I'm going to go kind of fast through that because it seems like that's not necessarily where we are in the audience. And then we'll get into, we're going to start from scratch, and this is all brand new. And then you're going to leverage all of Kevin's talk to make those gorgeous trainings that you're going to be building, that you're going to then put into these learning paths that we're talking about. So we're starting with some content here. So here's just sort of a basic catalog, right? I just went through a catalog at one of the companies where I'm working right now and pulled out the names of courses that seemed likely to be courses that multiple organizations would use. All right, so what do you see when you look at this? Kind of all over the map, right? Emergency procedures, bloodborne, business communication, hiring practices, stress. I've seen a lot of wellness courses, and of course, it being June, for those of you who are not aware, June is both the United States National Safety Month. So this is the month most organizations will do fire safety, CPR kind of training. All of those major drills typically happen in June in the United States. It's also Employee Mental Health Awareness Month. So this is a great time to be thinking about what you're doing to support your employees in their stress levels and happiness. And as somebody who lives above the 42nd latitude of here, I can tell you that I spend as much time as I possibly can outside because I get to see the sun for like 3 months. All right, then we got some remote work, becoming a supervisor. All right, so pretty generic kind of catalog that we're looking at here. Now, what are we going to do with this catalog? So the first thing I want to do is I would actually, in real life, in virtual world, whatever works for you, put these all on sticky notes. And then I would take those sticky notes and I would say, okay, who are the audiences that I have? And here you can see I did it as sort of like an Excel type chart where I have 3 different teams that I'm looking at: my supervisor team, my sales team, and my donor relations. Now, in real life, when you're doing this, I wouldn't have a course called emergency procedures and then have like people just check boxes. I'd have what's the goal of the course, what's the description of the course, what's the assessment coming out of this course look like, because you need to know that level of difficulty that's set into the course in order to be able to answer these questions. So I don't want you to think, oh, I'm just going to make a big Excel file and then send this to managers and have them check it off and be done. It is a little bit more involved in that because you're kind of assuming they don't know what the content is. So if it's something that I have a question about, I'll actually have the manager literally go in and take the course to make sure they know at what level it's at and the level of appropriateness for the audience. So for example, like bloodborne pathogens can be, what does the average person in an office environment take? Or it could be, hey, we're a phlebotomist working in a hospital. That's going to be really different in terms of what I take out of that course, right? So I need to know where that is. So to David's point is, yeah, I'm doing a really extensive needs assessment if I walk in fresh to an organization that has content. If I'm the writer of the content, so as an instructional designer, when I'm making something new for the first time, I like to put in my original design document, when we're talking about what it is that we're building, a shelf life. And so you could choose within your LMS to actually have the courses shut off at a particular point in time. So for example, these different ones that are like safety ones where I know the law is going to change next year because it changes every year or something like that, I'll actually have the courses deactivate themselves. And then I have a very intricate reminder system that'll tell me 3 months before that happens to make sure that I've done my update for the next year, loaded it into whatever system it is, and then added it back to all of the appropriate learning paths. All right, so I've gone through here and you can see something like emergency procedures here. I'm saying supervisor, sales team, and donor relations could all take that. Whereas I have some other ones like remote work fundamentals, I didn't assign to anybody. That seems kind of weird, right? Well, maybe there are supervisors who are remote and some who are on site, and the same with sales and the same with donor relations. So I wouldn't want to blanket assign a course to a demographic of my audience if I don't know that it literally applies to them. So maybe I have a learning path that's called remote work, and then when people do job transition plans or new hires that come on that are going to be remote workers, get to take that kind of regardless of their stratification within the organization. All right, so I kind of know all these courses now. What I'm going to do from there is I'm going to take all of those sticky notes and I'm going to put them up on the wall. And I personally, because I'm the person that's done the needs assessment on all these courses now, I'm going to go in and group them into things that I think make some sort of logical sense. So you can see I put together emergency procedures, bloodborne pathogens, and business communication. Was I drunk when I did that? Hopefully not. So what was I thinking there? I think that was probably some sort of new hire orientation, right? Because I need you to know what the emergency procedures of the organization are. Bloodborne pathogens in the United States is a required class in the government. And so I do a lot of government work. So there's that. And then business communication, I want you to know how our organizational expectations are for us to talk to each other. So I put those together. Then I have another one over here, how to overcome hiring bias, how to become a supervisor, how to develop a team. So this is clearly set up for somebody that's going to be curating and cultivating a team of employees. And so I grouped those together. And then I have a whole bunch of them that are just one-offs. And you're probably thinking, well, a one-off learning path is just a course, Emily. That's kind of silly. But to the point here, there are things that we're going to want, these ultimate goals of where we want to go, that we may not have that content for. And that's totally okay, because we're going to do a gap analysis. And then, being the amazing instructional designers that we are, or learning managers that we are going to curate or create whatever makes the most sense for our budget, our timeline, and our audience. All right, so now I'm going to start building the paths. So here I started a whole bunch of different paths that I think might make sense. So new hire orientation is going to have that business communication. Now notice here, even though I grouped those together on the previous slide when I was talking about doing them all together, you can see here I actually split them out. Why did I do that? Because new hire orientation, business communication, that's probably something I'm going to do once, and then I'm going to reinforce in the way that we talk to each other and in all of my future trainings what I want business communication to look like. Whereas a compliance course is something that typically is going to have to be redone every so often. So whether that's something that I'm offering annually or every 3 years, I want to be able to set timelines around it. And again, that's the benefit of doing a learning path, is I can have things expire. So maybe I'm going to do a badging system in my learning management system that's going to say, yes, I have met the compliance requirement for 2022, and I can watch that deprecate over time, and then I have to take it again in 2025, for example. So when you're thinking about your paths, first think about, do these courses make sense together? And then once you have that, then you want to get into, how often do I need to do this? What's going to be involved in this? How is it going to look in terms of being a practical thing that I am offering to my employees? Because again, you want to think both, what's the employee's reason for coming into this learning path, and what's the organization's reason for this? And I know I've been hitting hard on compliance. It's kind of like the thing we have to deal with, right? Nobody wants to take the compulsory courses, but they're there, so we might as well just own it that we're offering them, build the compliance course, and then give them a shiny, fancy badge at the end because they're staying compliant. And so when we get audited, we're all good. All right, now, then we're going to do this gap assessment. So on this last slide here, you can see, again, we've got 3 of my learning paths here have 1 course. Doesn't super make sense. So I'm going to do my gap assessment. And in this, I'm going to say, okay, what is my goal here? What do I want out of my learning path? Then I'm going to look at the content that I have, and I'm going to say, okay, of this content, is it required? You have to do it. Everybody has to do it. The world will end if you don't do it. Set a timeline on it. Make the LMS do exploding, sends it to your manager. I actually have one course with one of my clients where if you become non-compliant in this course, they will not let you walk into the building. It's connected from my LMS to the key fob system at IT, and they will lock you out of the building until you go get that course completed and come back in, because it's a super mandated government security course. Then we have elective courses. So again, what are these things that could add value, but there's some level of choice in it? And then the specializations for people who are advancing their skills in a way that can either move them into a lateral role or into a supervisory role, or whatever it is that their goal is within the organization. So I come in, I make all of this, I have little ghost sticky notes, or I do them in a different color, and then I'm going to build that into a backlog so that I can start from scratch. Because now I know there are these gaps, there are these pieces of knowledge that we need. Now, I do want to be careful to say that I am not usually the person that gets to make the decisions on what the ghost sticky notes are. I'll have that conversation with my subject matter expert, with the people in compliance, whoever it is that I'm working with, and they'll say, oh, we don't have a course on blah, 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 blah. Then you go into full instructional designer mode and you say, okay, what is the behavior that I want to change? Because obviously the reason that we train people is to change behavior, right? Who needs this change? Is it the government? Is it the organization? Is it the employee because the employees need to be happier, healthier, anything? How does it fit into the training structure? So again, that's where my little ghost sticky note comes in. And then how can it be reinforced? So I mentioned that my new hire orientation training may have a course that's called business communication, and that I'm going to reinforce that because I am going to implement the business communication levels that I want in all of the work that I'm doing in all of the other courses that I'm creating. But maybe we need to set up a formal spaced learning type of program where every 6 weeks, every 6 months, the timing differs based on how often the person has to do the thing and the kinds of check-ins that we have. But again, one and done training, I don't care if it's a 5-day training or a 20-minute training. If you talk to somebody in 6 months, the best you're likely to get out of that is, I took a training, it was called X, and here's 1 point from that, right? So what are we doing that's going to keep us making those changes, to acting to fidelity, to reinforcing that behavior? And that's where our learning path is going to come in. And that's the expirations and all the different things. Now, I mentioned a couple of times as we're talking about this idea of choice. So learners, adult learners, andragogy, if you haven't used that term yet, you should check it out. It's fun. They like choice. So even though you're putting them into a path and you're saying, this is what you're going to do, and this is what why you're going to do it, you want to make it as flexible as you can. So if there's a whole bunch of content that's like a base body of knowledge that somebody needs to do, if you don't have to say, take it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, don't. Just say, take these 6 courses, do it whatever you want, and your learners will be significantly happier about taking that course. Now, are you going to have the ones that are just going to go down the list 1 through 6? Absolutely. But for those ones like me who are a little bit nuts, who are like, ooh, I really want to do topic 4 first, sure, let me. Does it really hurt? And then you gate it to that next level of sophistication that you need from them. I like to use this term, and it's a little bit nuts, and you're probably only ever going to hear it from me because I think I made it up. I like to think of the interoperability of the modules you're creating. So people are multidisciplinary now, right? So when I talk about being an instructional designer, I like making a joke that like an instructional designer is like saying I'm a developer. And people, when you say that to somebody and they're like, oh, what kind of developer are you? People don't come back and be like, oh, I'm just a developer, right? So when somebody says, oh, I'm an instructional designer, and it's somebody who actually knows what that word means, they're going to be like, oh, so do you specialize front end? Are you a needs assessment person? Are you back end? Are you in the tools? Are you doing the development? Oh, are you the LMS admin? Like, I personally, if I got to remake the world tomorrow, would have a whole thing where it's like we have 200 different job titles the way that developers have done that, where you can be a front end, a back end, a Ruby, a software, all of the different things that people are doing to allow them to see kind of the variety of things that we do in our job. So thinking about this interoperability of modules that you're creating, when you have to create training on a particular piece of content, what I want you to do is think about how it can apply to the most audiences in a way that still makes it feel individualized and adaptive for that audience. So I'm not saying create like one bloodborne pathogens course and then have nurses, doctors, and Joe Schmo take the same course. I'm saying create something that'll be able to be leveraged potentially across multiple learning paths, if that makes sense. In that kind of framework. So let's talk about actually making the learning paths themselves, because we've got this content, we've found our gaps, now we want to go in and do it. What you want to do is then think about how you're doing this. So I am notorious for being like, well, it's just logical and I can just magically black box it. Hopefully that's how it feels to you too, where you can think about, okay, level of difficulty, the Kirkpatrick level. I love Kirkpatrick levels. So if you're not familiar with those, go meet the triangle. Talk about, is this a knowledge level course? Is this an application level course? Is this a self-awareness, I'm going to be actualized after this course? And incidentally, if you have a good one of those, send it to me because I want to take it. Think about where the person is in their path and how this content is supporting them from both the content perspective, like the literal difficulty of the content. I'm not going to start somebody off at discrete math if they haven't taken algebra, right? But also think about like how it's written and how it's going to work for that audience as well. Then you want to create these milestones, and they're those gates. People like achievement. Put badges in, put all the little goofy things. It doesn't matter if the badges are just like things you can only see in the LMS and nobody ever gets to look at them. People still get that little like dopamine hit of happiness when they achieve something. I can tell you, I just passed level 1 in Duolingo for Japanese. So if anybody wants to try Japanese with me, I'm still very bad at it. Um, but I totally got the dopamine hit that I passed level 1. Give them something that they can look to achieve. Give them that sense of fulfillment. And yes, I know learning for the sake of learning is what we all should be doing because, it's wonderful in life. But again, some of these courses that we have to take are not that. So anything that you can do to give that little oomph to make people happy about what they're doing, this grouping of the content, putting it into an order, giving me choice, giving me achievements, all are going to help us with the completion of these paths. Yeah, absolutely.
Terribly sorry to interrupt you, Amelie, but I think we've reached a certain milestone here during our presentation as well. We've got about 15 minutes left till the very end of your session, so we need to spread them wisely in terms of the rest of the presentation and the Q&A, so just wanted to inform you.
Oh, yeah, sure. I'm real close to the end, no worries. All right, so all of these things coming together, does this sort of feeling like I'm getting somewhere? The idea here is that you want a visual representation of your learning. And what do we call that? Gamification. Build a little world, let them go through the different levels, whatever it is that you want to do. Because again, giving that way that I can look at the training, understand where I am, understand where I'm going. A lot of LMSs now do this one where it's like a little road and then at the top there's like a person with a flag. I don't know. Whatever it is that works for you, you can do it inside the course, you can do it inside the LMS. Give people that understanding of where they are and what they can achieve. And with my interoperability thing that I mentioned earlier, I thought it was really funny. The first company that I did that with, the learners would do the beta testing and they were going through the different learning paths. And one of them called me up and they're like, I don't know what to do. All these courses are grayed out in my new learning path. And I said, well, okay, but if we go look at your learning history, you did learning path A and now you're on learning path C. And you already taken these courses, so I'm not going to make you take them again. And they were so excited. Like, it showed that they had this knowledge, and because they had been learning in other categories, they could now see that direct application of, oh, I learned these basic supervisory skills in this course, and now I'm applying that to, I don't know, paired programming and how that works. That's so cool. Because again, when you're thinking about courses, again, that's one of those terms that we would probably define if we were working together on a project. That can be like a 2-minute YouTube video. That can be, a branching scenario. All of these different pieces that you can use in all of the different parts. All right, so finishing the learning path, we talked a little bit about badging. The other thing that you want to think about when you're finishing your learning path is if you want to offer some kind of certification. So whether that's a certificate of achievement, hey, you achieved finishing this learning path, or a literal certification of some type, again, it's something that can be offered that can make people happy that they have finished what it is. Are you seeing the buffering too? Yeah.
Let's just proceed. I'm pretty sure that.
So you wanted to identify the incentives that you can offer to help people finish it. So one of the courses that I did, it was like a 6-month cohort thing where you had all these milestones and things that you had to achieve. We actually gave them like logo wear for the company at the end, because then they got to be like the social lubricant that went out and were like, oh, how'd you get that really cool jacket that has the company name on it? And they said, oh, well, I finished this new course that just came out. And then that was kind of like the marketing that we did to get other people to do the same thing. So at the end, you've created this learning path. It's got all the content in it. The last thing you want to think about is how effective is your learning path, and is it meeting the needs that we have for the organization?
I apologize, Emily. I'm so badly sorry, but I've just received a message from a technical assistant that we better need to make a pause because we have some technical issues, and I think we need to wait for them to be resolved. But I'm not sure if we are going to be off the recording, so I'd not recommend to go far away from the computer or...
Oh, I'm not going anywhere. I'm right here.
Yeah. Now I've been said that it should be fixed. Please confirm to me if we can continue. Dear colleagues, give me a message, please, about our continuation. Should we proceed? Please text me if we can move on. It means that we can, right? Starting from the point where we finished, or? Yes, okay. Yes, please, Emily, continue.
Sure. Okay, so at the end, we've got this learning path. We're happy with what we've set out. We're going to beta test it with a group of users, because you always want to test with a smaller group before you do wide deployment. So the things that you can test on, first off, completions, like how many people are actually finishing it. And think of it like a marketing funnel, right? So you're going to have a huge number of people that are going to start, and then a percentage of them finish, particularly if you don't set a deadline and it's not compulsory. So don't be upset if you see that you have like a 15% finish completion rate on something that's optional. If you've got over 30, I would say you were doing a fantastic job and you have a really motivated workforce, and you're going to get up into the 80-90% on stuff that's compulsory for everybody, because you're going to figure that some people will start it and then leave the organization before it's finished. Look at the scores. Are you gating the information the right way? Are people actually able to pass the different courses? If they're not passing the courses, what is it that's causing it? And then ultimately, the reason that we do training, the reason that all of this happens is because we want to change what a person's doing on the job. And so it's one of the hardest things that I've had to learn in life, is that people's reason for going to work is not to take the training that I write. I mean, I feel like that should be a thing because I wrote it, and so why wouldn't they want to take it? But their reason for working is to do the job they've been hired for, right? So looking at that Kirkpatrick level 3, observing them on the job, are they actually doing what it is that's our goal? So hopefully that was helpful in telling you about learning paths and gave you some best practices. I'd love to answer any questions anybody has, and please feel free to connect. And thank you so much for having me. I'm so happy to have done iSpring Days with you.
Yay! Thank you very much, Emily. I really enjoyed the whole presentation. And on the one hand, it was just exciting to hear about the learning paths. On the other hand, it was a real pleasure to see how your slides matched Kevin's expectations in terms of icons, photos, and all of this visualization. That actually proves that was a great preparation done, of course, not only content-wise, but also design-wise, visual-wise. All right, thank you so much.
Hopefully everybody caught all of the slides have paths on them. That was the goal.
Okay. I see we have received several questions during the actual speech. So would you mind if I read them out loud for you? And
please,
we'll try to cover as many as we can.
Mm-hmm.
Please don't switch off the sharing of the screen, just a kind reminder. And the first question came from Anna, and she was asking, I work for a fire stop manufacturer, and our courses are meant for the learner to properly install our products. So how do you create short learning modules when the material is very technical?
Okay. Surprisingly, one of my clients right now is the same thing. So what we do is we focus on the different parts of it. So for example, like I have a module on how do you use this kind of tool to do this sort of installation. So like these types of screwdrivers for this type of thing, so that we can do lots of little short modules, and then they can have proficiency checks. So can you use all these different types of screwdrivers? Do you know how to choose the right screwdriver for the right head of whatever screw nail type thing that you're using? Now, when it comes to the literal assembly, you're going to have to break it down into the parts that make sense for the person to stop. So like a lot of the stuff that we're doing, like the line's moving, right? And so you have to do that assembly within the speed of the line movement. So I would probably do it where it's the process, and then maybe have like pause points in it where the person could stop it if they needed to go back and watch it over again, or have buttons that are like, hey, I didn't see how this worked. I'm building one right now where like you actually have the tool in front of you and you click the tools off the wall and you do the assembly within the module. But again, think about your levels here. So first is the knowledge level. Do they know what to do? Do they know how to read the instructions? Can they follow the instructions? Like putting it into a sort order and procedural, and then moving them up to application. Can I use, or skill rather, can I use all the different parts? Like, I know what the instructions are. Can I literally do what I'm being asked to do for each part of it? And then that higher level, the application level, okay, I know the instructions, I know how to use the tools. Am I assembling it all together? So that's how I would think about building that out.
Right. I even wonder if that is not confidential, and maybe you could just share at least a couple of screenshots with Nadia. No, it's not
No,
possible.
sorry.
No, it's all right. Just a wild guess. Right. Unfortunately, we don't have a question from John, so I can't prioritize his question, but I have a compliment from him saying that you are very, very good at what you have done, Emily. He's thanking you very much. And we still have some time for yes. And we still have some time for a couple of more questions. The one from Sirmani. I apologize if I don't read the name correctly. Is there a book about e-learning for me to buy? Please let me know. And we've already discussed a book of yours in the chat, but maybe there are some other recommendations.
Yeah, so my book I would see is more like a career development book. Like, I don't know if I want to do e-learning. So for people in the industry, I mean, don't get me wrong, buy my book. I'd love that. But for people in the industry who are looking to learn about e-learning specific development, I'd probably look at Michael Allen's books on the definitive guide to e-learning. If you're looking to get into instructional design, the two greatest books I have ever read are Julie Dirkson's Designing for How People Learn and Kathy Moore's Map It would be the instructional design books that I feel like everyone on earth should read and know.
Julie was one of our guests during previous iSpring seminars, and her content was extremely valuable for all the participants, I'm sure. So thank you for this reference as well. And thank you for the question. And we'll proceed with a couple of more. Juventus is asking, how can I tell if, how can you tell if your content is the right content for the current time? And how do you get the right content? A very philosophical question at the same time.
So how do I know if my content's for the right time? So when I'm doing my needs assessment on existing content, the first thing that I'm going to do is go in and take it, like literally like a learner. And then there are certain things that you're going to see that you'll know make it not great. So if I joke that I have to delete my portfolio every year because at the beginning of the next year, I feel like the previous year was so ugly that I don't even want it associated with my name. But you've got to do that sort of like gut check. Does this feel like it was made in 1995? Is what this training is saying aligned with the current values of the organization? So is it meeting with my inclusivity goals now? Is it meeting with the accessibility goals now? So as organizations are becoming more cognizant of the learners that they have, does the training meet that need from like a literal functional standpoint and from a way we talk to our staff standpoint? So if it passes those things, then the next thing that I would do would be going into checking with the SME to make sure that the content is literally accurate, like have laws changed, has science changed, whatever it is that the course is about. And then if all of those things are right, then I would do a beta audience test. So if they take it, are they getting out of that what the goal is? And if all of those things work, then I would say your course is good to go. And you can say, I'm going to check it again in 2 years or whatever you put as your shelf life. Now, I think your other part of the question there is like, okay, so I have this course. How do I know that this should be the third course in my learning path? And that's something that you want to, when you're building a learning path, you want to think about that the same way that you think about a course. So what's the goal of the learning path? What's the organizational reason for taking it? What's the learner's reason for taking it? Does the information that I have as my 1 and 2 build up to the information that's covered in 3? Or does this make more sense? Is there some other context somebody needs in order to be able to be successful with this? And in order to answer those questions, you really have to know who your audience is that's going to be taking that learning path. So somebody who's coming in with 2 master's degree versus somebody who's coming in straight out of secondary school, you may have different prerequisite courses that you would offer. So if that happens, sometimes I'll have something where it's like a learning path that you have to take as a prerequisite to another learning path that's stratified by like job type. So if you come in as a supervisor, you don't have to take some of the basic employee courses. You can jump to the, as a supervisor, this is how you deal with the employee basic courses kind of idea.
Great. Thank you very much, Emily. I think we've got just, oh no, the question was deleted by the author. I wonder if Celine changed her mind about asking this question. Then it's fine. We only have 1 minute left, and I think I'll just use this minute to thank you very much for your fantastic material. I'm not sure if you were able to look through all the comments that were sent in the final part of your presentations. We have received so many compliments and really, really a lot of fantastic words about the content and how useful this was. And people are constantly asking about when they're going to receive the slides and how. So we assure you guys, you will receive the slides. Emily, we really appreciate your effort, and it was a fantastic opportunity for us to learn from your experience.
And thank you so much for having me. I'm so thrilled that I hopefully helped some of you today. And I wish you all the best of luck in making wonderful learning paths and gorgeous training that creates behavior change.
Right. Once again, thank you, Emily. Have a great day ahead and see everyone in 18 minutes.
Hi, everybody.